China's power projection took center stage once again this week at the annual Xiangshan Security Forum in Beijing, shortly after a dramatic military parade earlier this month. Now, before we get expert analysis, here is a quick recap. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun had hailed Beijing's efforts to reshape global governance, as he stressed that his country's strong military was a force for peace. He also said that the People's Liberation Army would never allow any Taiwan separatist attempts to succeed. Analysts also pointed out the minister's veiled swipes at the US. The Chinese defense chief said that the might is right approach will see the world led by the law of the jungle. For more on this, let's bring in Zhou Bo, a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy in Tsinghua University, and he is also a retired senior colonel of China's People's Liberation Army. Well, thanks once again for joining us, Mr. Zhou. First of all, I want to talk about Taiwan, where basically Dong Jun warned against external interference on Taiwan. So help us understand this. What actually really crosses the line when they're talking about interference? Is it about arms sales? Is it about naval transits, high-level visits? Tell us what are some of the lines there that it's being drawn.
That is really a good question, because both China and the United States talk about red lines without specifying what kind of red lines actually are, because in the past, where China certainly was more ambiguous because it was not so strong, right? But now China is becoming stronger with its military strength, so therefore we're seeing the United States is still keeping this strategic ambiguity, but this kind of strategic ambiguity actually would not be that much confident as compared with before. So I think neither side has specified what the red line is, but I believe both sides have a good understanding of what the other side wants.
Oh, Mr. Cho, we spoke to an analyst and he pointed out that when China talks about multipolarity, it's less about everyone playing by common rules. Now that's multilateralism, and it's more about big powers carving out their own turf. Here is how he put it, so let's listen in.
Where I think Dong Jun's speech was fairly interesting to me was when he talked about the need for sort of regional and region-led solutions, right? So in contrast with this call for unity, he's essentially saying that there should be a sort of prioritization on regional actors. And so other actors that might have interests in the South China Sea, in Taiwan, should basically stay out. And that also, I think, is interesting when he brings in this idea of multipolarity, which is different from multilateralism. Multipolarity historically means you have big powers, they carve out areas of the world which they're dominant. So there's a certain tension in Dong Jun's comments.
So, Mr. Cho, from your experience in the PLA, do you think that what we heard there, Professor Chong's interpretation, is fair? Do you think Beijing genuinely see multipolarity as a path to shared security?
Of course, absolutely, because this is not just what Beijing thinks. It's actually the common sense of the people around the world, including the United States. And actually, American Secretary of State Rubio has talked about how it is not normal to have a unipolar power. So at the Munich Security Conference this year, the theme of the conference is multipolarization. So China definitely is in support of multipolarity, and of course China is a polar itself. The question is, the world is becoming less Western, and even the West itself is becoming less Western. So how could the West overcome its mentality and believe that, okay, they're but equal members of the international community? So I think it will take some time, because maybe it will take another 10 to 20 years for the United States to come down to realize that they do need to have more cooperation with China. You see, during the first period of Trump administration, very few areas of cooperation actually are mentioned. But ever since Biden administration, they have been talking about how China is needed in terms of cooperation, how China should persuade Russia, how China should persuade Iran, and how China should even talk to Houthis, right? So China's role is indispensable. But China, of course, would like to, stand together with all these major powers, big or small, to talk about all these issues. So China's formula for global governance is not that it wants to overthrow the international order, but that it will, cooperate with other countries to address the common challenges and threats.
And Mr. Cho, we also heard strong words on freedom of navigation operations, and we have also seen the rising tensions, right, with the Philippines. So I'm curious to know, how do you think China basically is trying to balance its message? It talks about safeguarding peace, but at the same time, it has that firm military posture in the South China Sea.
Well, it's very simple. I don't believe that there would be a conflict between China and the Philippines, simply because China is overwhelmingly stronger. Well, just think of the fact, the Filipinos have stranded a Russia ship on the second Thomas Shoal and have stayed there for 26 years. If China wants to do anything, how easy that would be for us, right? So yes, the Chinese Coast Guard used water cannons, and that might be very impressive on TV camera because the people people are instinctively sympathetic with a smaller country. But what if I told you between China and the Philippines, actually it's the Filipino Coast Guard who used the force against the Chinese fishermen in 2000, 2006, and 2013. Yeah, so far, what the Chinese Coast Guard has done is just to use water cannon. And that actually is a kind of effort to avoid use of force. So using water cannon, in my eye, is a kind of deterrence.
Right. So the forum that we saw, it wasn't just about, policy papers. There were some heated exchanges as well. And I want to pick up on this striking moment that we saw a Tsinghua University dean. He was openly challenging an Israeli delegate on Gaza and saying, quote, that you should have shot the terrorists, not the children. So, Mr. Cho, I'm just curious to know, this is quite unusual. What does it tell us about the Xiangshan Forum's wider role in international dialogue?
Well, I know who you are referring to. You are referring to Professor Yan Xutong, a well-known Chinese scholar on international relations. I think on this issue, what has happened in Gaza, the international community should have no ambiguity whatsoever, right? More and more countries are starting to recognize Palestinian as a state. Well, what has really happened? I was told, some Israeli visitors, just to think of this. If all the dead bodies of all these innocent people are put on the ground, 70,000, how big the ground would be, right? And most of them are innocent people, right? And do you have to kill all these people simply because you want to kill the so-called terrorists?
Right. So that was one striking moment. There was another idea that was raised at the forum, and that was Beijing could learn from German reunification after the Berlin War to incentivize Taiwan. Mr. Zhou, but given Taiwan's advanced economy, its democracy and distinct identity, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how realistic is that model?
Well, at the Shangri-La dialogue, American Secretary of State Peter Hegseth said that, a kind of conflict might be inevitable and could be imminent. This is totally contrary to what the remarks of his predecessor, right? And I believe that we still have time, and Chinese government still has patience. You see, as China becomes stronger, actually, China could just embark on two different roads in two different directions. One is because it's getting strong, therefore it will become more confident about eventual peaceful reunification. The other thing is it could become impatient because it is getting strong, right? I think the former is still true because the Chinese government is still talking about peaceful reunification, which best serves our own interest. But what you are seeing now is in the island of Taiwan, the Taiwanese leader is really becoming provocative. He described himself even before being elected as a pragmatic Taiwanese independence worker. And he now would describe the Chinese mainland as a hostile foreign force. So who is going too far, right? So we very much are having the same policies, but it's the Taiwanese separatist authorities that is becoming more and more provocative. So even if I would say that China should be more confident, I sometimes do have some fear that this kind of patience is running a little bit thin now.
And Mr. Zhou, do you have a timeline for reunification?
Well, I do not have this timeline because according to our roadmap, China should realize the greater reunification of the Chinese nation by 2049. Some people say, okay, that would have to include the reunification with Taiwan, but you would not find such kind of wording in official Chinese document. So I firmly believe that reunification is a must. Just imagine, with China become ever stronger, how can China afford still to have some of its territory still separated from mainland China? Yeah. Otherwise, how could you describe yourself as a country that has achieved greater rejuvenation? So this is a must, and definitely it will be realized. The only question is through what means. So right now we are still having patience. We still talk about peaceful reunification, but the Taiwanese authorities should realize that time is not on their side and Taiwan cannot move away.
Many thanks for your thoughts there. Zhou Bo, a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy in Tsinghua University, and he's also a retired senior colonel of China's People's Liberation Army. Thanks so very much for that interview.